The day my entire secret unraveled, I wasn't even the one who started the conversation. I was sitting across from my older brother at a diner table with a cup of coffee going cold between my hands, and he looked at me with the steadiest eyes I had ever seen on him and said, quietly, without any setup at all, "I know about the box under your bed, Reed. And I need you to know that I love you no matter what's in it." I stopped breathing for what felt like a full minute. But to understand why those words nearly destroyed me and then somehow put me back together, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning is a long way from that diner. My name is Reed. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Tennessee, the second of 3 boys in a household that ran on routine and tradition, and the kind of unspoken expectations that nobody ever articulates because they don't have to. My father coached youth football for 20 years. My oldest brother Garrett played varsity in high school and still talked about it at every family gathering like it was the defining event of his life. My younger brother, Wes, was loud and easy and comfortable in his own body in the way that some people just are, naturally, without effort. And I was the middle one, quiet, observant, the one who read too much and felt too much and had learned early that the safest place to be was slightly in the background where no one looked too carefully. I was different, and I knew it from the time I was old enough to know that different was something that required managing. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. Just in the constant, low-level way of a person who has understood that certain parts of themselves are not for public display. I learned to redirect conversations. I learned which questions to deflect with humor. I learned to perform being fine so convincingly that there were years when I almost convinced myself. The feeling I'm talking about is hard to explain to someone who hasn't had it. It's not as simple as wanting to wear women's clothes, though that's the surface of it. It's deeper than that. It's more like carrying around the persistent, wordless sense that the version of yourself that the world sees is a translation, and something is being lost in that translation, something important, something that keeps trying to surface and has to keep being pushed back under. I had been pushing it back under since I was 12 years old. By 25, I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I lived alone in an apartment on the east side of the city, where I worked remotely doing technical writing for a software company. The solitude of the work suited me. I was good at being precise about things that other people found complicated. What I was not good at was being precise about myself. That particular clarity I had been avoiding for over a decade. The box under my bed had appeared in my life about 8 months before the diner conversation. I had driven 40 minutes to a mall I never went to, in a part of the city where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew, and I had spent an hour moving carefully through a department store, not touching anything, not picking anything up, just looking, cataloging, building up to something. What I finally bought was a simple silk blend blouse in a deep teal color, the kind of color that has some blue in it and some green and shifts depending on the light. I had stood in the women's section for 4 minutes holding it before I carried it to a register staffed by a woman who was texting on her phone and rang it through without looking at me once, which felt like grace from the universe. I brought it home in the shopping bag and put the bag in a shoebox and put the shoebox under my bed and didn't open it for 11 days. When I finally did, I was alone on a Thursday night with the kind of quiet in the apartment that feels full rather than empty, the specific quiet of a space where something is about to happen. I sat on the edge of my bed and took the blouse out of the bag and held it. The fabric was light in a way that surprised me even though I had held it in the store. It had a softness that was different from anything in my actual wardrobe, where everything was cotton and denim and rough weave flannel. When I ran my thumb across the sleeve, it moved against my skin like something that had been waiting. I took my t-shirt off and put the blouse on. My hands were shaking badly. My fingers fumbled with the small buttons for an embarrassing amount of time. But when I finally got it on and let the fabric settle against me, something happened in my chest that I had no vocabulary for. It was not comfort exactly, though comfort was part of it. It was more like recognition. The way you feel when a word you didn't know you were looking for suddenly appears, and you realize it was the thing you needed all along. I stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror, the only full-length reflective surface in my apartment. I stood in front of it in the teal blouse and my jeans and bare feet, and I looked for a long time. My face was unreadable to me in that moment, the expression that happens when you're experiencing something too large for your features to organize around. But my eyes were bright in a way they weren't usually bright. and my posture had changed. I don't know if I can explain it accurately, but I was standing differently, like something in my spine had released. I cried, quietly and without warning, and for reasons I still can't entirely articulate. Not from sadness, though there was sadness in it, the grief of knowing how long it had taken to get to this moment. More from the overwhelming sensation of having set something down that I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it had weight. That night was the beginning. Over the following months, the box under my bed became something more complex than a single blouse in a shopping bag. I added carefully and slowly. A pair of slim trousers and a charcoal gray that had a fall and drape completely different from anything in men's clothing. A soft cardigan the color of oat that I bought from an online retailer and had shipped to my office building's mailroom among a batch of work packages, which was clever until I realized it required carrying the package home on the bus trying to look completely normal, which I managed. A skirt, only one, a simple dark olive midi length with a subtle pleat, which I bought last because it felt the most irreversible somehow. And makeup. I started with the least conspicuous things. A tinted moisturizer that could pass as skincare if anyone ever noticed it in my bathroom cabinet. A clear brow gel, to learn the motion. Mascara that I practiced with and removed 3 times before I let myself look in the mirror. And then, gradually more. A muted eyeshadow palette in brown and taupe. A lip color in a color I can only describe as the exact shade of a brick wall in late afternoon sun. Warm and earthy, and somehow exactly right for my complexion. Learning makeup was one of the most humbling things I have ever done. The tutorials made it look accessible. The first 15 attempts suggested otherwise. I have a specific memory of sitting on my bathroom counter on a Sunday afternoon with shadow blended the wrong direction and eyeliner on my actual eyelid rather than my lash line, and looking at my reflection and starting to laugh. Genuine, helpless laughter. The kind that comes from being too tired to take your own disaster seriously. But I kept practicing. And slowly, the way any skill comes together, it started to work. The first time I put on the whole combination, the charcoal trousers and the teal blouse and a light application of makeup that I had finally gotten to a place I could call intentional rather than accidental, I stood in my bathroom for a long time. Not moving. Just looking. The person in the mirror was still me. Recognizably, undeniably me. But the translation was better. The version looking back felt closer to the thing inside that had been trying to find its way to the surface for 13 years. I said nothing out loud, but inside, very quietly, I thought, there you are. I had a system for the box under my bed. Everything folded neatly, in a specific order. The moment I heard anything unusual outside my apartment, footsteps that paused too long, a knock I wasn't expecting, I could have everything back in the box and the box under the bed in under 3 minutes. I had timed it. The makeup lived in a separate small bag inside the shoebox that I could close and place at the back of my bathroom cabinet, behind a collection of things nobody would have any reason to move, within 90 seconds. I lived in this system for 8 months, and for most of that time, the fear was constant. Not sharp, not crisis level, but present in the way background noise is present, always there, coloring everything, occasionally spiking when someone knocked on my door, or when my phone rang from an unknown number, or when I had a moment of irrational, groundless certainty that somehow, impossibly, someone knew. My brother Garrett was the person in my family I was closest to, which was relative because we were not an emotionally demonstrative family. Garrett was 5 years older than me, divorced, living across town, working in facilities management for a hospital. He was straightforward and competent and not particularly given to introspection, which made him easy to be around because he never pushed. We had a standing thing, dinner every few weeks at the same diner we'd been going to since we were in our 20s, where we ordered the same things we always ordered and talked about nothing that mattered, and it was enough. It was a particular kind of brotherly ease that I had valued precisely because it required nothing of me beyond showing up. I had never once considered telling Garrett. The thought had literally never formed itself in my mind as a real possibility, which is why the conversation at the diner hit me the way it did. He had come to my apartment the previous week, which was unusual. He called ahead, which was also slightly unusual, enough for me to notice. When he arrived, I made coffee and we talked about ordinary things for a while, and then he had asked to use the bathroom. Routine. Normal. except that my bathroom cabinet had been partially open, and the small makeup bag was visible because I had gotten careless. 3 months of successfully managed concealment, making me less vigilant than I should have been. I did not know he had seen it. He said nothing. He came back out and we finished our coffee and he left, and I had no idea that anything had happened. He apparently went home and thought about it for a week. At the diner, he waited until we had ordered and the server had walked away. Then he put both hands flat on the table, which I recognized as his version of preparing to say something difficult, and he told me he knew about the box under my bed. He said it the way I told you at the beginning of this story. Without accusation. With that steadiness. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment, because I think it matters. The cold that went through me was total, the kind of cold that starts in your sternum and radiates outward, that makes your hands numb and your vision do something strange at the edges. My first coherent thought was a kind of inventory. What did he see? What does he know? How much is this recoverable? My second coherent thought was that I was looking at my brother's face, and it did not look like the face of someone who had come to cause damage. He said it again. I love you no matter what's in it. I picked up my coffee cup and put it down without drinking from it. Then I said, how? He told me about the cabinet. He told me about the week of thinking about it. He told me he had almost not brought it up, almost decided it was not his business, but that he had thought about the last couple of years and something about me had seemed heavier than it used to, and he had decided that love didn't mean looking away from the people you loved. I don't need to know everything, he said. I just need you to know you don't have to carry it alone. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the diner windows, the city was doing its ordinary afternoon things. A bus went by. A woman pushed a stroller. Everything was completely normal and completely surreal at the same time. I don't know how to explain it, I said finally. You don't have to explain it all at once. Or ever really. I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm just telling you what I said. There's a particular kindness in not requiring explanation. I had not understood until that moment how much of the fear of being known is really the fear of having to justify yourself, having to make your interior life comprehensible to someone who didn't live inside it. Garrett wasn't asking me to justify anything. He was just taking me as I was, sight unseen, whatever the box contained. I told him some of it. Not everything, not yet, but some. I told him about the blouse and the box and the months of quiet private practice and the mirror moments and what it felt like to exist, even in private, even alone, closer to the thing I actually was. I told him about the fear, the constant arithmetic of concealment and what it cost, the tiredness. He listened the way men in my family generally don't listen, which is to say he actually listened, without planning his response or deflecting into something more comfortable. When I finished, he was quiet for a bit. And then he said, You've been doing this alone for a long time. Yes. That sounds exhausting. It is. He nodded. He picked up his fork and ate some of his food, and I did the same, and the conversation moved around for a while, and then he said, What do you need from me? Right now, I mean. Just tell me what's actually useful. Nobody had ever asked me that. In all the imagined versions of this conversation that I had run in my head over the years, which were all terrible, nobody had ever asked me what was useful. It was such a practical, specific, Garrett kind of question that I almost laughed. I think, I said slowly, I just needed someone to know and not run. Okay, he said. That I can do. And that was it. That was the conversation. No declarations, no weeping, no dramatic confrontation. Just my brother looking at me from across a diner table and staying. The weeks after that conversation were strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had expected relief, and I got relief, but I also got something else, a kind of disorientation, the feeling you get when a wall you have been leaning against your whole life suddenly isn't there anymore, and you have to relearn how to stand. I had organized so much of my interior life around concealment that not concealing from at least one person left me briefly uncertain of my own structure. I also started to notice during this period things I had been too afraid to notice before. Specifically, I noticed Ren. Ren Okafor was someone I had known tangentially for about 2 years through a loose mutual social group that occasionally convened for things like group dinners and birthday gatherings. She was a landscape architect, 30 years old, originally from Atlanta, with a voice that had this specific, unhurried quality to it, like she had made peace with taking her time. She was perceptive in a way that was evident from the quality of her questions, not interrogative, just genuinely interested, the kind of interested that made you want to be worth being interested in. She was also funny in the particular way I find most appealing, which is understated, the kind of funny that you almost miss and then suddenly understand, and it's twice as good for the delay. I had been keeping Ren at a distance without quite realizing I was doing it. In a group, I would drift to the edge of her orbit and then drift away again. I would think of things I wanted to say to her, and then not say them. I was aware, in the background, of wanting to know her better and not letting myself pursue it, which I had attributed to general social caution, and which I was beginning to understand had a different cause. I couldn't let Ren know me better, because Ren knowing me better meant Ren eventually running into the parts of me I was hiding. And the parts of me I was hiding felt, when I was being honest, like too much to ask anyone to absorb. After the diner conversation, that calculus started to shift. It didn't happen in a neat, decided way. It happened the way most real things happen, gradually, and then suddenly, through a series of small events that each seemed minor until you look back and see that together they added up to something significant. The first event was a group dinner in September at someone's apartment where Ren sat across from me and we talked, properly for the first time, for about 2 hours, in between the general conversation, a kind of parallel dialogue that kept returning to each other even when the table pulled us toward other exchanges. She had a way of listening that was similar in quality to Garrett's listening, complete and unperformed, and I found myself saying things that I hadn't planned to say. Nothing revelatory, just real things, actual opinions and real stories, rather than the pleasant surface-level content I usually deployed in social situations. At the end of the evening she said, "I feel like we've been at the same table a dozen times, and this is the first time we actually talked." And then she gave me her number without me asking for it, with the directness of someone who knows what they want and doesn't manufacture unnecessary drama around it. We started talking regularly after that. First through texts that were initially occasional and then more frequent, and then through phone calls that I had not had with someone I was newly getting to know in years. She called the way people used to call, not for a specific reason, just to talk, just to continue a conversation that was ongoing, and I found that I was rearranging my evenings to be available for those calls without consciously deciding to. The fear came back in a different form. Not the fear of being found out, which was its own specific texture, but the fear of being loved under false pretenses. Of building something with someone while they didn't have access to the part of me that mattered, the part in the box under my bed. I talked to Garrett about it. This was new and strange, having someone to talk to. He was not a man of abundant emotional vocabulary, but he was willing to engage, and he said something I've turned over many times since. He said that the false pretense logic was something I needed to examine carefully because it assumed that the thing in the box was separate from me, an addition, an extra, when from everything I had told him it seemed like it was actually central to who I was. He said, "You're not hiding a secret from Ren. You're hiding yourself. And that's a different problem." He was right. I knew he was right the moment he said it. Ren found out on a night in November that I had not planned for and could not have designed if I had tried. She had come to my apartment for the first time to drop off a book she had mentioned and then actually remembered to bring, which was one of those small actions that tell you something meaningful about a person's attentiveness. She texted from outside, and I buzzed her up, which gave me 45 seconds, and in those 45 seconds I remembered that the cardigan was on the back of my desk chair. Not in the box. On the chair. Because I had been wearing it that evening, because I had started, in the months since Garrett's visit, to be slightly less regimented about the concealment, to allow myself the small normalcy of simply existing in my own home. I grabbed it as I heard the elevator. I had the box open and then I stopped. I stopped because I was suddenly completely tired of the reflex. The grab and hide, the 4-minute system, the permanent crouch of a person always ready to make themselves smaller. I was tired of it with a clarity that surprised me with its force. I put the cardigan back on the chair. I answered the door. Ren came in with a book and we stood in the kitchen talking for a while, and then she moved naturally into the main room, the way people do when they're comfortable, and I watched her see the cardigan on the chair. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at me. And then she looked around the room with that perception of hers in a more comprehensive way, taking in things I had never hidden, things that were just part of how I had started, quietly, to arrange my life. She sat down on my couch. She held the book in her lap. And she said, in that unhurried voice. Tell me something true, Reed. 3 words. Tell me something true. Not an accusation, not even really a question, more like an invitation. The door held open, the light on. I sat down in the chair across from her, the one with the cardigan on the back of it. And I told her, not everything. There was too much for one conversation, and I knew it. But the shape of it, the blouse in the teal color, the box, the years of it, what it felt like to stand in front of the mirror and see something closer to the truth of yourself than you had ever been allowed to see in daylight, the tiredness of the concealment, and what it had cost. She listened the way she always listened, complete and unperformed. When I finished, there was a silence that was not uncomfortable, that had the quality of a space being created rather than a conversation stalling. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said yes. When you're dressed, when you feel like yourself, what do you feel like? What's the actual feeling? It was such a specific question, and it deserved a specific answer. I thought about it honestly. Like the translation got better, I said. Like there's less being lost between what I am and what I'm able to show. She nodded slowly, like that made sense. Like it was a perfectly comprehensible thing to say. I don't think I understand everything about what you've told me, she said. I want to be honest about that. But I don't think I need to understand everything right now. She paused. What I understand is that you've been spending a lot of energy on hiding instead of on living. And that seems like a significant thing to stop. I looked at her. You're not scared off. By what? By this. By what I told you. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words in the careful way she did when something mattered. Reed, she said, I've been paying attention to you for 2 years. I don't mean casually. I mean I've been genuinely curious about who you are, and I kept running into the sense that I was only getting part of you. She looked at me steadily. I'm not scared off by the rest of you. I've been waiting for it. I had to look away for a moment. The window, the street below, the ordinary November evening. I should tell you, she said more quietly, that I've had feelings for you for a while. And I realize this might be a complicated time to say that, but it seems dishonest not to, given what you just told me. I looked back at her. She continued, I'm not saying that to pressure you into anything. I just don't want to be the person who makes you hide more of yourself. Whatever this is between us, if it's anything, I want it to be with all of you, whatever that means. I had spent 13 years believing that the all of me was the thing that would drive people away. That the box under the bed was the thing that made me too complicated, too much, too inexplicable to deserve the ordinary experience of being known and loved for it. I had built an entire secondary life around protecting other people from having to encounter the full version of what I was. And here was Ren Okafor sitting on my couch in November, asking for all of it. Not performing bravery about it. Not making a sacrifice. Just genuinely, calmly, asking. I didn't know what to do with that except be grateful. And terrified. And slowly, imperfectly hopeful. We talked until past midnight. We ordered food at some point and kept talking. The cardigan stayed on the back of the chair, and nobody moved it. I told her more, in fragments, non-linearly, the way real things are told rather than the organized way you tell things when you've rehearsed them. She asked good questions and didn't ask others that I wasn't ready for, and by the time she left she had more of me than anyone else in the world had ever been given. The experience was terrifying, and also something I didn't have a clean word for. Not just relief. Something more forward-facing than relief. Something that looked like possibility. She texted me when she got home. It said simply, "Thank you for trusting me." I sat with my phone in my hand and looked around my apartment, at the cardigan on the chair, and the box that I could see partly under the edge of my bed from where I was sitting, and I thought about who I had been at the beginning of the year, and who I was now. Not transformed, not arrived, not finished with any of the difficult parts. Still in the middle of something that didn't have a clear shape yet. Still carrying questions I didn't have answers to. Still working out what the rest of the translation looked like, and what name it went by, and how it fit into the life I was going to build. But not alone in it. That part had changed. Garrett called me the next morning, which was unlike him. He's not a morning person. I told him about Ren, and there was a pause, and then he said, "Huh." which from Garrett is the equivalent of a lengthy emotional speech. And then he said, "You sound different." Different how? I don't know. Less like you're reading from a script. I had been reading from a script for so long, I had forgotten what my actual voice sounded like. What it sounded like to say things that were true without editing them first for an imaginary audience, without checking them against the performance of who I was supposed to be. Learning to speak without that filter was going to take time. I knew that. Some habits of self-erasure are not undone in a single November conversation. But the beginning of a thing is still a beginning. I still have the box under my bed. It has more in it now. Not because I still need to hide it there, but because that box is where a version of myself began to exist in the world, and I'm not quite ready to scatter its contents through an open wardrobe the way a person does when they're done being careful. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe the careful phase serves its purpose and then releases you. I think that's probably true. What I know is that the conversation in the diner was the first time someone reached across the silence I had built and held out their hand without requiring anything of me except to take it. And that from that single moment, something started moving. Not fast. Not without fear. But moving. My brother still doesn't say a lot about it. But last month he texted me a link to an article about something he thought I'd find interesting, which is not the kind of thing he does, and at the end of the text he added, "Hope you're good." Actually good, not the script version. I wrote back, "Actually good." And for possibly the first time I could remember, I meant it completely. The conversation I was most afraid of having turned out to be the one I had been most starved for. The person I was most afraid of being turned out to be the only version of myself worth inhabiting. And the journey that began in a diner across a table from my brother, with my hands shaking around a cold cup of coffee and my whole body braced for something terrible, turned out to be leading somewhere I hadn't let myself imagine before. Not to an ending, to an opening. And that, I'm finding, is better than any ending I could have written for myself.